to All right, let's go, folks. This is LinkedIn Live, and I am so fortunate to have and host Ambassador Carmen G. Cantor, G for Gloria. A lot of people don't know that. They see that little thing, but I knew. So great to have you, Ambassador, with me to discuss a couple of things, some things that we share in common, where we came from, some things, areas that we visited in and around the world that we were both fortunate, and some of the great pieces that comprise your book. But before we get into all of that great conversation, tell us a little bit about you. We're going to go into detail about you, but hey, what are you up to now that you are post ambassador?
Well, Enrique, thank you so much. First and foremost, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I am really, really honored to be here to be doing this podcast with you. Thank you so much for the invite. So you mentioned, that I work as an ambassador, as a U.S. ambassador. I actually work in the U.S. government for 34 years and 8 months. I retired in January of this year after that a lengthy career. I began right after college in La Isla de Puerto Rico, in San Juan, and I worked for five different agencies throughout my entire career. Uh, right now, I have been, over the last 6, 7 months, I've been working on this book that we're going to discuss in a few minutes. I don't know what else is coming up next, but I'm pretty sure it will be good. Like everything that has happened, things happen for a reason, and here I am. You'll be one of the first people to know what's coming up next. But again, thank you, thank you, thank you for having me here, and looking forward to our conversation this morning.
Absolutely. And I'm so happy that this book is launched. You're right. All things lead to greener pastures, especially when you put so much work into it. Now, folks, we're going to be going into a little deep dive here in Ambassador Cantor's life. A lot you can get in her book, and I'll show that here because I got a copy, right? So we put that in the link in the comments. You can go straight there. It's available on Amazon if you'd like to purchase it. So please do go there. Now, Ambassador, there's a lot that we share, mainly the island of Puerto Rico. I was born in Ponce, en Clausel de Ponce, en el barrio que llaman Los Chinos, right? Los Chinos over there by the municipal cemetery. But you was born a couple of towns to the west. And I remember specifically going to Mayagüez when I was growing up and as a younger adult. But I spent some time in the United States in the Bronx, right? So I started in Puerto Rico, went to the Bronx, and then returned and graduated high school in Puerto Rico, and then entered into the Navy. But how was growing up in Puerto Rico? We kind of shared a timeline there, right? The 70s, the 80s. How was growing up there, and how was those formative years critical to putting you on a
Mhm.
path that we will discuss here in a little bit of becoming an ambassador?
Well, Enrique, I never dreamed, I never imagined, I never planned to becoming an ambassador. I never dreamed that I never thought I would be writing a book, and here we are, right? Those early years, were so different, so different than what it is right now. One of the things that I discuss in my book is how there was no internet back then. I used to live in Mayagüez. Mayagüez is my hometown. I was raised in El Barrio Balboa, which is in, about a 10-minute walk from the center of town, La Plaza de Colón. But my parents, their house was in El Campo, and in the mountains. So we had to drive, 15, 20 minutes. And there was a lot of times when we didn't have electricity. Still, they have issues, there are issues with, the power outages or water. we did not have a phone. And this is something I was discussing with a group of students last week. I was trying to explain to them, just imagine you growing up without a phone. I'm not talking about a cell phone, I'm talking about a phone in your house because there were no telephone poles. So again, very, very different. We only had one TV, a black and white TV, where we will watch three channels and the telenovelas, soap operas, of course. That was it. So I think that because I didn't have much of that, there was no internet, no, the cable. We didn't even have cable. My parents didn't have cable in their house. I started, I developed this hobby of reading. I was reading all the time. I was a client of the local municipal library almost every day, basically devouring books, learning about the world. And that kind of, I would say, planted a seed for me, to want to learn about what's happening in our planet, learn about other countries, their governments, their cultures. So that's how that seed was planted. I also had the opportunity to, because I was, again, very, very young. My parents put me in this little pre-K program that is not what it's today. It was this one lady who was a retired teacher. Her name is Doña Mencha. And I remember her so well because, many of us in Mayagüez, in Barrio Balboa, like Paris, we would go to her little school and learn the basics of reading and understanding, the letters and all that. So by the time I was done with Mencha, Doña Mencha in pre-K, the school determined that I was, because I already knew how to read, that I was 1 year ahead of my, classmates, and they put me in first grade. So technically, just to say, I graduated from high school a year earlier than most of my classmates, but it was very, very important that I had that opportunity to learn so early on. I was always very dedicated in my classes, had good grades, because again I had that thirst for learning about what's happening in the world and how we can make a difference, right, early on. Something else that I did, again, there were not too many things to do, so I was either reading or I was volunteering in community and school organizations. So I did a lot of that, and I was a Girl Scout. I was in high school. We had different clubs: the Leo Club, the Math Club, drama, and also the Civil Air Patrol, which is another organization that I credit for teaching me the basics of leadership, and all that happened during those early years before me, graduating from high school and going to college. So that's how things went back in the early 80s.
Yeah.
I'm aging myself here.
Aging us. Well, let me tell you, so, I have my Latino shirt. Folks, if you don't know, and I know that a lot has made it out of the federal support, but this is or we are in the last 2 weeks of what we call Hispanic Heritage Month, all the way to October 15th. And you will be sure that I will be celebrating every day for the next 2 weeks, being Hispanic. But I'll tell you that, and I'm going to focus on Doña Mencha here. You mentioned to the retired teacher teaching kids in the local neighborhood on how to get, into schooling the right way, right? No one preps you ever to get into something. They normally just throw you in there. But let me tell you about the worth of these individuals in our communities that are doing the labor that is thankless and often not paid, because the Doña Menchas of the world hardly ever get a day in the spotlight. And I'm so grateful for you. When I was reading that, and I'll try not to get all mushy. It's just that there are so many people who are overlooked, and they do so much for us as children and for the community. And for those Doña Menchas out there in the world that are doing this silently, without any recompense or notoriety, thank you. Thank you for what you do for the children. Thank you for what you do for the community. It was great that you mentioned her because she will live on, right, for forever as long as this book resides, and in my mind and the minds of the readers, because they often get overlooked, but I'm glad that you spotlighted her. I also want to highlight entities and organizations like the Civil Air Patrol. I was part of the Civil Air Patrol. I was part of Junior ROTC. I was part of the Sea Cadets as a commanding officer. And so I know and appreciate the roles that these organizations play in the lives of young people. They establish, you mentioned leadership, right? They
Mhm.
establish for these children. And if you know anything about these organizations and you would like to support them, please do. They need all the help they can get, both in funding and also in support. But they create a very strong foundation for children. And I don't, I'm sure you remember pretty well those years in the Civil Air Patrol and how that solidified you on your journey. So tell us a little bit about your experience with the Civil Air Patrol and how impactful that was.
No, it was so impactful, Enrique. I didn't know, if I was going to join the armed forces. I didn't end up joining the armed forces. I probably would have joined the Air Force because I was with the Civil Air Patrol during, my high school year. Actually, it was middle school and high school years. But let me just say a little bit about it. I'm still in touch with people that I met back then, and when I travel to Puerto Rico, I do see, a few of them. I run, we talk. um, the Civil Air Patrol has what they call a cadet officer school. I became an officer. I earned the Billy Mitchell Award, the Amelia Earhart Awards, and move up the ranks. uh, they sent me to this cadet officer school in Maxwell Air Force Base in Alabama. So here I am as a teenager being sent representing the squadron, the Puerto Rican squadron in Alabama for about a week. And it was an incredible experience learning from others, learning from all these, people with so much knowledge about the basics of leadership, which, I didn't know much. So that was the first thing with the Civil Air Patrol. The second thing is that they have, I believe they still do it, this International Air Cadet Exchange Program, where air cadets from all over the world, they meet, during the summer. And I had the opportunity to be selected for that program twice. Not once. It's usually you do it once, but in my case, because my first time I traveled to Canada, and the U.S. Civil Air Patrol, they wanted their cadets to travel overseas, and they didn't consider Canada to be overseas. The people who went to Canada, they had the opportunity to go to another country the following year. The second year, I went to England, and it was, you can imagine, a teenager going to a country. I had no money. I mean, this is all paid for by, the Civil Air Patrol. I'm with other people who have had the same type of, mentality and interest. And here we are. Here I am in England. Actually, we arrived the day of Prince Andrew's wedding, which was quite an event because the whole country, it was a holiday. So again, those things plus everything that I read, growing up about countries and cultures, I think from the very, very beginning, Enrique, I was being prepared for these roles that I had at the end of my career. So again, I cannot emphasize enough the importance of community organizations and organizations such as the Civil Air Patrol, what they do for youth and for teenagers in our country.
And I tell you that I have been supportive of but I also went through myself, right? Junior ROTC, Sea Cadets as an officer and a commanding officer. And I'll tell you that the impact is lifelong. These are lifelong impacts that these organizations and programs have on our youth. And so I encourage everybody that knows anything about them to fully support. But if you don't know, I'll be sure to put in links to all these different organizations in the comment so that you can explore what they do. And they may have one in your community that you may want your youth or child to be part of. And I wholeheartedly endorse those programs because they do have a lifelong impact. Now, I mentioned wearing my shirt, Hispanic Heritage Month, and we're so proud to be celebrating. But I wanted Ambassador to talk a little bit about the Latino impact on the U.S., right? And uh, reading your book was where I first saw about your husband. Your husband came from the Central South America area, came to the United States, was a postmaster, right? It's not postal clerk delivering mail, but when you become a postmaster, you're at the top of the game. You're leading, or you're leading groups, you're leading people, and the narrative around the states, I you just have to say it, is not as bright as it used to be. Unfortunately, when you're talking about immigration or people coming in from other countries, and to be honest, even as a Puerto Rican, sometimes I feel like I've immigrated because of just the feeling. I mean, I've always said this, and even going back to Puerto Rico, sometimes I feel like an immigrant because they say "Es de allá afuera," right? But I was born in Puerto Rico. But the thing is this: uh, the environment right now is very touchy. It is very sensitive to the immigration subject, but not all is bad. And I'm telling you from the perspective of a person that came from Puerto Rico and achieved so much and gave so much to the nation, and individuals that have come from other parts of the country, of the world, have come and contributed to the levels of impact like you would have no idea. And so I, number one, applaud your husband for making that journey and making what he did uh, with what he had is amazing. And then you take us that come from the island and are fortunate and blessed to serve in capacities to give of our time and our effort, our treasure to the uh, basically enlargement of our nation, right? And sometimes it feels like there's not that many things, but let's talk about the Latino impact on the U.S.
Yeah, Enrique, thank you so much, and thanks for the words about my husband. Um, Listen, the impact of the Latino community in the U.S. is huge. You look at the arts, you look at the sports, you look at politics as well. Every single aspect. You're gonna find Latinos. You probably are aware. We just heard last night who's gonna be doing the halftime show during the Super Bowl. That's, I think, the best example that I can use right now to showcase and amplify what is it that Latinos are doing in the country. um, in my case, having worked in the federal government, there are many Latinos who have worked in the federal government, and we've had Latinos who have served at very high levels in the government under both administrations, Republicans and Democrats. So again, I don't have numbers in front of me, but as well as probably many of your viewers know that the Latino population has grown tremendously over the last, I don't know, 20, 30 years. Uh, we have different perspectives, different cultures, different ideas that I think really help our country be stronger and better. Uh, yes, we're living different times than what we are used to, or what we thought was normal was. But again, the impact of the Latino community is going to be there because we again, we're people who have studied, have worked really hard to move up the career chain. So again, I cannot be, I feel blessed that I'm part of this community. And like you said, we're celebrating Hispanic Heritage Month. We're observing this important month because this is a country, as you know, where the United States is a country that was built by immigrants. And, we're here, together trying to make it a better country. So, again, I'm very proud of what we have accomplished. I know that there are many things, many more things that we can do. And I'm, again, looking forward to seeing more people in different areas. I have met people in the arts who are household names, people who are in the science field who, have done great, great things. And now, again, going back to that announcement of the Super Bowl, I mean, it's going to be quite something, watching that show in about 5 or 6 months. So it's great that this is happening because, Enrique, I think that we have a duty to educate people about the contributions that not only Hispanic Americans but everyone, African Americans, Asian Americans, people with different religious beliefs, we make our country, and we make it a stronger country. So here we are again. Can't wait for that Super Bowl halftime show. See what Mr. Bad Bunny is gonna do during those 15 minutes.
Well, I'm sure he's going to represent the island pretty well. And I am hopeful that his impact during this very big, important game, right, that we watch every year, will be one that will be etched in people's minds for a while, right? I'm so thankful for the opportunities that Hispanics have had throughout and Latinos have had throughout the centuries, throughout the world. But more importantly, here in the U.S., because I know for a fact I knew two fleet master chiefs, and there's only five of them at any given time. Two of them were one was Hispanic, Mexican descent. The other one was Puerto Rican descent. And another fleet master chief that I know is Panamanian, right? So there are just so many things going on, and so much support from the Latino community that often doesn't get praised as much, but the impact is there for a long time. Now, talking about impact, there was an individual that you were able to serve with that while I was in service, he was in service, and that's Colin Powell. I admire his trajectory to becoming the Joint Chief of Staff, to become a four-star general as an African American was a huge thing. To become the first Joint Chief of Staff it's just a totally different thing. But then he also moved into the State Department, right? There was no end to his impact, really. But you were fortunate to serve with him and alongside him in support of whatever endeavors the U.S. had at the time. So tell us about that, a little bit about that experience for you.
Well, I was again beyond myself in terms of how the excitement that I felt when I joined the State Department in 2001, and Secretary Powell. You most people in the military know him as General Powell, but to me, Secretary Powell, he also became the first African American to become Secretary of State. And what I love about serving with him and working with him was the fact that he was a leader. He was a visionary. He took care of his troops, both in the military and in the State Department. And I'm going to give you a couple of examples. I think I mentioned some of them in my book. Uh, he he came to the State Department. I don't know if you ever read his biography, but he talked about his 13 rules of leadership, and he talked about how the military invested in him, in his education and training. And when you look at his entire career, I think it was 6 to 7 years of his career, he was in some sort of training or educational program. And he comes to the State Department and he realized that there were no programs, no leadership programs set up for employees. So he went ahead and made it mandatory. He created three programs for basic leadership, mid-career leadership, and senior level leadership. And this was something that was mandatory for both the Foreign Service and the Civil Service. If you were a GS 13 or the equivalent in the Foreign Service, you had to take the basic leadership program. Same thing for the 14s and the 15s and senior executives. So that alone was something so impactful that he knew the importance of leadership, and he knew how uh, employees, if they're going to be in positions where they are going to impact, staffs and policies, the basics were necessary. So he created those programs and he made them mandatory. And they're still doing it, after all these years. That was one of the things that he did. The other thing that he did is that, he made sure that employees had the tools that they needed to do their jobs. And one of those tools that we did not have at the State Department when I joined in 2001 was access to the internet in our desktops. And for now, again, everybody who's younger than you and me, Enrique, uh, this is normal, right? For people like you and me, that was not normal. And I remember going to the State Department, starting my job, and not having a laptop, or not a laptop, a desktop, where if I needed to do some research, Google something, I couldn't do it. We had to go to a special room. It was in different offices, and you had to make a line and wait for your turn to get to use the computer for, I don't know, 15, 20 minutes. I mean, just imagine if people had to do everything is now in a moment, you do it on your phone or you do it on the laptop. But that, again, that was not happening in the State Department. So he changed that. So those are just two examples of the impact that he had. He treated everybody so well in terms of, you know, uh, he cared about his employees. He also held his employees accountable, which is something that you as a leader know. I mean, you cannot have one without the other. We do need to have accountability, and he did that as well. So again, I was so honored when I was selected for the position at State. I was the first recruiter that was hired to specifically work on uh, getting more people interested in careers, more people, minorities interested in careers in foreign affairs, and that gave me the opportunity to meet him, and I saw him in a couple of occasions, had a couple of interactions with him. We even had him. Let me just say this. For a Hispanic Heritage Month event at the State Department, I believe this was 2002, 2003, actually. We had Placido Domingo, the Spanish opera singer, with Secretary Powell, and I had the honor of introducing both of them to the entire State Department workforce. So again, a great. I still have fond memories of Secretary Powell, and he was great. He was a great boss and a great human being.
Yes, I remembered him fondly as the general, right? You're right. Yes, he was serving in the secretary capacity still while I was in service, but so good that you had that experience, and I'm sure that all of that kind of padded into your resume of who you would become. So let's talk about now the Pacific, right? Something that we also share in common, which is the Pacific. You, it is not like Puerto Rico. I'll tell you that, right? It may be tropical in nature. You see the palm tree, you see the coastline, you see the water. Yes, that and Puerto Rico kind of is similar, but once you go on land and inland, it changes
It's
dramatically, right?
different.
It's different. Um, but I was listening to an interview that you had done, and you mentioned that the islanders were happy that you were an islander, right? Because at least you know something of what that feels like, right? Growing up on an isolated island somewhere where you're dependent on external forces to bring in and supply and help and all of that. So in the Pacific, your first go at this ambassadorship, you get, hey, you're going to get to this island or this area. How did that feel for you, having come from an island that you were going to now serve as an ambassador on an island in the Pacific?
Well, Enrique, let me tell you, I when I got the call, I was more super excited about both the opportunity to serve as an U.S. ambassador, but also to serve in a country in the Pacific. I always thought that if this opportunity came about for me to become an ambassador, that I will go to somewhere in Latin America because I speak Spanish, right? But that was not the case. The opportunity came to go to this country in the West Pacific, and it was an incredible experience. You are right. Very tropical, very similar to Puerto Rico. As a matter of fact, I tell everyone that the day that I landed, I just look out the window of the plane, and I just felt like I was landing in San Juan International Airport. I just felt like I was going home, but it's different. It's different because, first of all, you're talking about 607 islands that are spread across more than 1 million square miles of ocean. So, just to put it in perspective, if you look at the map, the continental map of the 48 states of the United States, that's how you could see the Micronesian country, the Federated States of Micronesia. But instead of land, you have water. So you could have an island in Florida, where Florida is located, and another one where Oregon is located. And connecting it was not as simple because, again, it's very, very far away. Getting and you've been to Pompeii, the capital, one of the states of Micronesia, the FSM. To get there, if you're coming from the east coast of the U.S., it's going to take between 3 and 4 flights. You either fly through Hawaii or you fly to Japan and Guam to get to Pompeii, and it takes close to 2 days to do that. So again, we're talking about different things. If you're going to go to Puerto Rico from here from the East Coast, you get on a flight 3 hours, 3.5 hours, and you're there. Same time zone. Here you're going 10, 12, 13 time zones, and it was different. It was also different because of their history. They became part of the Trust territory after World War II, when the United States liberated the country from the Japanese. Again, they were occupied by the Japanese during World War II. So again, that's different. Puerto Rico didn't have to, you know, uh, deal with that during World War II. So many, many different things, but you are absolutely right. There were other things that were in common. And the fact that I was an islander, that opened so many doors. I was welcome with open arms. I had a great relationship with the government of the FSM because we could discuss topics of common interest and understanding. So I have to say that having that background, that I grew up in an island, and I had one of the examples that I use is the uh, Pell Grants, the education.
Mm.
I went to public schools in Puerto Rico, which is, schools in Micronesia are mostly public. There are a few private schools. I went to college using a Pell Grant. And the majority of the people in the three compact states, Palau, Marshalls, and the FSM, they go to college using Pell Grants as well. So all those things, really uh, clicked with the people of the country. And like I said, I had one of the most wonderful experiences, of my career working in Micronesia. We can talk for hours about Micronesia. I mean, I was there for 2.5 years during COVID, which is another experience, another story. But it was overall a fantastic experience, and I'm so glad to hear that you've been to the region, so you understand exactly what I'm talking about. The waters, the corals, everything is beautiful, extremely beautiful. But it takes a while, to get there. It's not that simple.
Yeah, I actually got there through the Coast Guard. I was deployed with the Coast Guard as a Navy, what they would call input into their
Mhm.
deployments. And I remember pulling up alongside Pohnpei and the island and getting carvings from the local artisans and all those things that I really cherished. That journey through the Southern Pacific, through the Western Pacific, and seeing all those islands, visiting the islands, getting an exposure unlike any other, because typical big Navy would not go there, right? But since they have me as a fleet input with the Coast Guard, I was fortunate to experience that during my career, and it was one that definitely I'll cherish. Now, the Pacific you mentioned COVID, and I'm sure that during that time it was pretty critical, because I know that there were a lot of things that the islands did to kind of minimize the spread of COVID. How did that impact your effectiveness as an ambassador during that time when there was so much restriction worldwide, but especially during the at the islands?
Well, once again, Enrique, I think, I take everything that happens to me, everything happens for a reason. And in my case, the president of Micronesia, he of the FSM, because Palau and the Marshalls are part of the Micronesian region. It's just that this one country is called the Federated States of Micronesia, FSM. The president of the FSM, he closed the borders of the country on January 31st, 2020. And the reason why I'm mentioning the specific date is because I arrived in the country on January 30th, the day before. The next day, the 31st, I was in his office presenting my credentials at 10 a.m. And by 2 p.m. in the afternoon, he had decided to close the borders. And if you think about this, back in 2020, people started reacting, mostly in the United States and around the world, around, I would say end of February, beginning of March is when people started reacting to, there is something happening, right? I don't have to describe. I think most people remember what happened during those first few months. But the president of the country, and to his credit, I think he felt that if he did not do what he did, the country, if this illness that we were all hearing about coming from Wuhan in China was what it was, he knew that it was going to be devastating for the Micronesian people, because there are lots of illnesses like diabetes, many things that he knew they were going to impact the population, and he closed the borders immediately. So for me, I had a very different experience than many of my uh, fellow ambassadors around the world, because the country managed to keep COVID out until July of 2022. There were no
Wow.
cases of COVID. Yes, there was no social distancing. At the beginning, everybody's trying to. Everybody was careful. We talk about only having not more than 10 people around. Everybody was, they were wearing masks. But then, when we realized, country realized that there was no COVID in the country, we were able to do many things. We were living normal lives. But that meant a few things. Number one, for me particularly, my husband, my youngest daughter were not able to join me because the borders were closed. And I basically served for 2.5 years uh, alone, and that's another conversation.
Wow.
Um, yeah, first. And second, because there was no COVID, yes, we helped the country, the United States helped the country prepare for COVID. We had trainings, we have meetings with the government along with other embassies in the country, with the national government. We got ventilators, we got vaccines. They got vaccines at the same time that the rest of the US, the states received the vaccines. So we were able to work together to minimize the impact of COVID. The COVID eventually arrived in July of 2022. So because of that, I was at the embassy. I was able to focus on other areas, economic issues, scientific issues, work on telecommunications, work on one area that I work a lot on was women's empowerment. Micronesia, the FSM, was one of the few countries in the world by the time that I arrived in 2020 where there were no women in their legislature. So I tell
Yeah.
people, just imagine everyone. I mean, president, vice president, the senators, everybody. It was a male dominated government. And so I work in areas like that, and again, not the same experience that many of my fellow ambassadors had, because they had to focus completely on what was happening in their countries with COVID devastating the countries the way it did. So I feel, Enrique, and I said this to a couple of people, that there were things that I was not able to do because since the country was closed, I did not receive not even one visitor in my 2.5 years. And maybe that was a blessing. Who knows? Receiving congressional delegations, CODELs, staff DELs, none of that happened. But at the same time, like I mentioned before, I did this alone. I would go to an empty house every night after work. Again, an empty house. So it was difficult, but I'm very proud of the work that we did. The United States, working very closely with the FSM, and my family was terrific, supporting me. Thank God for the platforms that we have now. That that's one of the silver linings from the pandemic, right? All the things that we're doing with Zoom and Teams and all these wonderful tools. So because of that, we were able to remain strong as a family, but it was not easy. I have to say that.
Yeah, that's we call those tours long tours in the military. But you do get to go home every 6 months at least, right? On a R&R segment of your tour. But wow, in not only to deal with being isolated, as I because those islands are pretty isolated, and to get to them, it did it requires a lot. And so to add on the shutdown of the borders, to add on to that, no visitors, no family, I applaud you for sustaining yourself all those 2 years. I did notice that you had taken a trip to Indo-Pac. I served at Pac Fleet in Pearl Harbor, so I know that the admiral that was there, and we shared that as well. So by the time you got to do that journey, where was that? Is that in the latter part of your service there, or was that during something else?
No, on my way to Micronesia, I stopped in Honolulu for consultations with Indo-PACOM, and I did meet with Admiral Davidson
Hmm.
at the time. And then I went on, I had some meetings in Guam. I spent some time in Guam also, and I had meetings with several admirals there, uh, the governor of Guam, and again, Guam is so close to Ponape that many of the services and programs that the U.S. provides to the FSM are based out of Guam. So I had those interactions either on my way there or when I went out, because I did go out for a couple of meetings, in Washington D.C. This is right before in February. I went to Micronesia. President closed the borders, went back to Washington for a meeting of all the ambassadors, and then on my way back, I had to quarantine before re-entering the country. But I had those opportunities to meet with not only Indo-PACOM but JRM and Coast Guard as well, which again were fantastic. All of them were fantastic partners during the time that I was in the FSM as the chief of mission.
Well, thank you for serving that area, that theater. A lot of people don't know about the Pacific Theater. They're just worried about the national footprint, but there is so much going on, folks, around the world that the United States is involved in. I personally remember a trip that I went down into Peru. It was diplomatic in nature. It was a resource in nature. It was not a war, centric, and all these little things that we do, right? Doing a survey of their harbors and their ports, all these things add to the reputation of the United States, to the relationship with these countries around the world. And it's these little things that you don't get too much news on that are keeping relations going. And so, thank you for doing what you did in the West Pacific Theater, one that I love. Half of my tours and half of my service time was in the Pacific Theater. So Guam, Japan, all the Southern Pacific Islands, Hawaii, San Diego, all that was part of that portfolio, if you would say, of my service. So I really appreciate it. Now, I want to transition into the book, but I also want to transition into this one piece that I call the big erase. For those of you listening, you may or may not know, Sometimes these things get highlighted, sometimes they don't. But there was a big effort by the federal government, whether it's now or some other government, right? Some other government time. There's always these initiatives to bringing about change. One of those efforts this last couple of years has been the sanitization of certain things. One mainly being anything that had a feel or flavor of DEI was eradicated. And in that eradication, in that sanitizing were stories and history of individuals that have broken through ceilings, have uh, become the first at this and the first at that. And one of those stories was yours, Ambassador, unfortunately, right? And I want to talk about that because a lot of people don't understand how hard it is to do what you do, how hard it has been to do what I've done throughout our career, only to find someone hit a button and have it all vanish from the public light. And I'll tell you, that it doesn't feel good to me. I'm sure it didn't feel good to you, but uh, when you saw that, hey, your part of history was pulled out of the public light, what went through your mind?
But Enrique, I remember, I think this is what, 8, 9, 10 months ago when news started coming out. I think I saw a report in the New York Times about how many websites, many pages, from federal uh, government sites were being pulled because they contained the words, diversity or inclusion, or you know, uh, something to that effect. And you read about it and you hear about it, but it doesn't, I think, sink in until you experience it. And regrettably, I never thought that I would be something that was related to me would be part of that. And let me just tell you, Enrique, some people ask me, why did you write the book? And it's all related. I at first wrote the book because I wanted, after having the opportunity to work with so many incredible people in my career, people that you hear about in the news. You mentioned Secretary Colin Powell. I mentioned Placido Domingo, having the opportunity to meet him. Um, I work with Secretary Hillary Clinton. I work with Secretary John Kerry. I work with Secretary Deb Haaland, and had the opportunity to talk to Dr. Anthony Fauci during the pandemic. He helped us in with the government of Micronesia, clarify some misunderstandings. And I'm thinking about all that. I'm saying, here I am, someone who grew up in Puerto Rico, Maya West, in the mountains, public school education. Here I am having this opportunity because my hard work and went to school, worked, moved up the career ladder. Here I am. Let me write this story so my daughters. I have 3 daughters. It's not forgotten, right? Because we can forget. So that was the main purpose of the book. Let me just put everything in writing so it's there for them. But then, as I'm doing my research for the book, I recall one piece that was written by the Museum of American Diplomacy, and this is about 3 years ago, in commemoration of Hispanic Heritage Month. They ran a very nice piece about my work, and it was entitled "From Maya West to Micronesia: The Journey of Ambassador Cantor." And I went looking for that piece and I couldn't find it anywhere. It was taken down. And then I started searching pieces that I knew were written about other ambassadors were either Hispanics or African Americans or Asian Americans, and I couldn't find any of them. Not even, they were not even archived, which is what I expected, but they were gone. And at that moment, it hit me very, very differently. And that's when I started thinking, you know what, I am now writing this book not only for the reasons that I share with you and with your viewers, but also because it is important not to, it is important to tell our stories because they are also American stories. You know, we are Americans and we have served our country and we have made many sacrifices. And because something happened where those words were included, that those words were not treated the way they're being treated and discussed now, 20, 30 years ago. It was a completely different environment. Here we are. So the book took a different, you know, how can I describe it? My goal became something else, and that's why I wrote the book with that purpose. I want to inspire others with my story. It's a kind of a story of a si se puede, yes we can, yes you can. Again, who would have imagined that someone like me who grew up in a town, not in San Juan, not speaking English is not my first language, public schools, Pell Grants, move my way up, learn from great leaders, had great opportunities. I also have had opportunities that were not that great, but I managed to make them opportunities because that's important too when you're growing and you're moving up the career ladder. So that's where we are. So the book became a compilation of things that happened to me when it's a bunch of stories. What you're gonna see when I was growing up, my upbringing, my career. I included some tips about leadership that I picked up along those 34 years of government service. I talked a little bit about how to balance professional and family life, which is something that I think most of us struggle with. And then at the end, I just closed the book with one story about my time in Micronesia, uh, working with the traditional leaders in the country. So that's the story of you call it the big race. I don't call it the big race, but it impacted me in a way that I didn't foresee.
Yeah, and I mentioned the big erase because it seems that it was like a big eraser going after different things, indiscriminatory. Because I do know that keywords were used. Unfortunately, some of the data for some people was completely gone. It just was a shame that it was done that way, and it impacted a lot of folks. Well, folks, the book is The Ambassador: Two Hats, Two Presidents. You already see it's a bestseller on Amazon. We are so proud of you, Ambassador Cantor, for not only what you did in your career, but for representing Puerto Rico in such a great way. Thank you for that. I appreciate it. Also for showing that, as your book says, si se puede, right? You can do this. Put your sights on a thing. Make sure that your activity is in in line with that thing, and just continue to be steadfast in what you do, and you will see results. Sometimes results you didn't expect, and those are great. Sometimes results that were not so great, but in all, it makes our story what it is. Thank you for being an inspiration to all Puerto Ricans for what we can do, given the opportunities, and also for this new milestone, one of many, I hope, because I'm sure that all of it was not captured in this little book right here, right? Although there's a lot of pages, but I know everything wasn't captured, and I'm sure you have more stories to share. Folks, thank you for being with us live on YouTube, Facebook, and I see that on LinkedIn there was some issue, but we'll make sure that this whole entire video is provided on LinkedIn for you to enjoy as a replay. Carmen, thank you so much. God bless you. God bless your continued journey. Give our love to your family for their support of you and all that you've done. And I will see everybody on the next live. Any last parting words for the audience?
Yes, yes, Enrique, and thank you again so much for having me here in your podcast. And thank you for your service, and to your viewers, thank you all for the sacrifices and the dedication to our country. It's really appreciated. We wouldn't be here without you. So thank you, muchas gracias. And again, it's a pleasure and an honor to be here with all of you. See you
All right.
later.
All right, everybody.